Hi, I'm Dr. Jurgens, and today we'll be talking about diabetes in pets. Now, diabetes is something we see pretty commonly in animals, in all sorts of species, dogs, cats, even ferrets or small mammals, and it typically presents in middle-aged to older animals. In talking about diabetes, it's essentially a disease of insulin, and insulin is a hormone that's produced by the pancreas, and it's what helps regulate your body's blood sugar. And essentially it's what helps bring that sugar from the bloodstream into the cells so your body can use that sugar for energy. In diabetes, we have a problem in how they are able to use the insulin. And so in people, we really talk about type 1 or type 2 diabetes. We don't really have those distinctions in animals, but we can kind of characterize it similarly, but dependent on species. In dogs, it's more similar to type 1 diabetes in people, meaning their pancreas isn't able to produce insulin like it should. Cats, on the other hand, are more similar to type 2 diabetics, meaning they can produce some insulin, but the body just isn't able to respond to it as well, so they're more insulin resistant. So depending on the species, essentially what we have is this lack of response to insulin, and so the sugar in the bloodstream becomes really, really high. A normal blood sugar in an animal should be between 100 and 120 usually, and in diabetics, the sugar can get upwards of 300, 400, even 500 or higher. But even though there's all this sugar in the blood, the cells can't actually take that in to use it for energy. And so the cells essentially start starving. And so that leads to one of the really commonly seen signs in diabetics. They'll have a really ravenous appetite, but they'll still lose weight, even in previously overweight animals. Other signs we might see in diabetics would include increased thirst and increased urinations as well. Those are kind of the classic signs we might see. So if we're suspicious of diabetes, we can pretty easily diagnose that with blood or urine tests. And if diabetes is diagnosed, then we'll need to start your pet on treatment, which consists of daily insulin injections. This is something that owners can learn to do at home. It's a very small needle, so even though that can be intimidating, pets usually tolerate it really, really well, and it becomes part of the routine. There's a couple different insulin types you might hear of. In dogs, we tend to use more brands like Veterinary or Novolin insulins. In cats, you might hear of Lantus or Glargine used a little bit more commonly, but it really just depends on the individual animal. So once we start treatment with our insulin injections, it's very, very important to do frequent monitoring of our patients, especially in the first couple weeks after we start treatment. And this is so that, number one, we don't have our insulin or our blood sugar running too high, but equally as important as that is we don't want to overdose with our insulin and have our blood sugar drop too low, because that can actually be really, really dangerous. It can lead to symptoms like weakness. They can become disoriented or even have seizures or die if their blood sugar is too low for too long. And so very, very important that we don't give too much insulin, and that your animal eats a really good meal with each insulin injection morning and night. And there's a couple different ways we can monitor to make sure we're at a good insulin dose. You might hear of us checking a blood spot glucose, meaning you bring your pet into the clinic, we take a blood sample, and we just check a blood sugar usually about 6 hours after the previous insulin dose. Another thing we might do is a glucose curve, meaning you drop your pet off at the clinic and we'll check a couple different blood sugar samples throughout the day to get a really good sense of how our sugar is rising and falling over about a 12-hour period. Some owners do decide to learn how to monitor at home as well, which is something that is doable. There is a little bit of a learning curve to learn how to draw blood on a pet. It's not as easy as a little finger stick in a person, and you do have to have a special glucometer, one that is calibrated to measure for animals rather than people, but that is something that some people do with success.